So, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Lyrical Ones. I am your ongoing host, Cineo, and we have our co-host as well. We have Al Fluent. We also have June. Let's see if I can get this right. Oh, I had it right over there, right over there. I'm backwards, June. And we have a special guest tonight. Chris Scott. See, there we go. You got the arrow game down. So, Alfluent, how you doing tonight? How are you doing on this wonderful Wednesday as we record this evening? Please give me some insight.
Excellent. Like I feel like things started with the Olympics. We could start back with Muhammad Ali. Voices his opinion. I love one of my favorite quotes from Muhammad Ali is I became a champion because I had something to say. Um, and so I think about that as a direction in anything that I do. Um, that being black and when you have to be triple good in America, just be great so people will listen.
Yes, you are great. We know that, and you definitely have more than enough to say, and that's why I appreciate you. June, how are you feeling on this night, on this August 26th night,
Thank you so
2020?
much for asking, Cydia. Oh, I'm feeling so nice. Everything is great. Today's been a wonderful day. The school's back in session, something that I've noticed that, a lot more Zoom rooms are taking place. Zoom classrooms are going on, Zoom homerooms, so on and so forth. So as a former educator, that's what's been on my mind. And as someone who's going back to school in such a turbulent time or interesting time, I should say, hey, I'm just going with the flow.
Okay, okay. And before we get into the deep dive, Chris Scott, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing like we all are probably. There's good and there's crazy and there's bad and there's stressful. I'm a big A's fan and the A's won, so at least there's that nice distraction of something good. But yeah, chilling. Kids are asleep, so get to have some freedom for a little bit. Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
okay. No, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your company. I appreciate you.
Thanks for being
You
here.
know, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to ask myself, I'm out of pocket and I'm all the way lost. I'm all the way lost in the sauce. I'm all the way if anybody's seen my Twitter feed, they know where my head is at. My head is definitely right now proactive in change. Me maintaining some level of positivity, not so much. But proactiveness definitely. I am here to be responsible, be mindful of that. But yo, I don't know. So
Welcome to
with
another episode, Cineo.
welcome to
Welcome.
another episode. What number is this, y'all? What
I'm,
number we at? What's the consensus?
we on 13?
Are we on 13? Or is that the thing? Somebody put it in the chat for us. Those that know who's keeping count at home. Those that don't, there's a secret feed going
Yeah,
on all the time. So
13. 13.
okay, there we
Okay,
go. So
I got it right because I was saying something else last week, I think.
it's all good. We here. You know what I'm saying? We hold each other accountable. So with that, anybody got anything they want to, before we move on? Because I want to dive deep into what Chris Scott is doing, who he is, and what brings him to the table. But is there anything anybody wants to say before we start this thing off?
I kind of want to hear more, Sunio. Like, what's up, man? What's going on?
Well, Chris
You
Scott, thank you
got
for
some
turning the
things
tables. Thank
because
you for
he
turning the
got some
tables.
things. He needs to vent. So go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
for
right,
sure.
here we go. Here we go. So, first before I go on, let's have a moment of silence for Jacob Blake. Everybody, let's just take a moment to reflect. So with that moment, being in reflection of Jacob Blake, a lot has manifested within myself out of the circumstances and the situation and the fallout from that tragic event. Um, it has been a very emotionally trying time, just in the sense of, having to go to work now. I work in the community. I work alongside, SFUSD and many different organizations. And SFUSD being San Francisco's Unified School District, for those that don't know. I work alongside a high school that deals with a population that they would consider as being, kind of the non-successful students of the traditional scope of kind of school, right, of academia. And so it's considered a continuation school. When I don't agree with the terminologies, I don't agree with the energy that surrounds the school and kind of how this narrative is built. But in light of what's happened, it then again highlights how oppressive certain systems are, right? How power dynamics are very unfortunate in the way they show up and how they push what I call a false narrative on people of color and people who, in varying degrees of need and support. And so, me being at service to the community and me working with an organization that, has a predominantly kind of white base, it's a thing where, we are at service to a lot of communities of color, and there's always conversations around success and how do we determine and measure, and we don't critically critique and scrutinize what are these tools we're using, and how are we changing the narrative of what success looks like, and how are we changing the practice of how we do this work, so we don't find ourselves falling into the traps of these oppressive dynamics, these power structures that I see as antiquated and outdated. And, I understand there's a responsibility, but there's a responsibility to myself, to my community, to my people, of the things that I'm hearing constantly. I got friends that work at various companies in various places, and they're often the outlier, or they're often the kind of token person in their position, because they've been able to climb up the ladder, and now they're kind of held to a different standard. But at the same time, as soon as something like this happens, that's the first voice they want to hear. And, I've said it many times before on the podcast, knowing your capacity, right? I make myself available to that, but not everyone makes themselves available to that. And having that boundary and that acceptance of the boundary between all of our allies, between all of our colleagues, and between everyone who may seek, right, that brown approval, that black approval, right, that color approval, to be like, I want to hear your voice because that validates what I'm getting ready to do next. And it's a lot of times, we don't, people don't have to say how they feel. They still figuring out how they feel. They're in the process of feeling, right? Like, when I lost my mom, the last thing I wanted to do was talk about how I felt. And this is another loss to someone's family. This is another loss to our community as a whole, as people. And some will feel it differently than others. Some will process it differently. Me, I make myself readily available. And, my organization at times don't realize or doesn't understand that. And then there's other people who, they just want to be detached and they want to cut themselves off from it for a bit, right? And they need time to process and figure out what is their best course of action. And so, given everything that's going on, to me, this is, as my one of my colleagues, my close colleagues, has said, this is a continuous nightmare, right? Like, I wake up, I look at the news, and now I'm, kind of just lost in what is going on. I'm giving more towards something that is heart-wrenching and problematic. And, to make matters worse, this morning, I see what happened last night, and it's now kind of the coin has flipped in a way where, I'm looking at this imagery, and to kind of paint the picture of the imagery, is a 17-year-old young white man, young kid with a gun. And, I see him shoot somebody, and he runs towards the police, and they're like, he's saying he shot somebody, and then the police just go and leave him, and that's it. And I was like, this is such a profound moment and such a profound image to witness what's transpired. I see him being chased. He falls, he shoots, and then he goes towards the police as an act of safety. And then he's able to go home, as then I find out in the story, he's able to go home. And, the matter is dealt with at a later time, when the whole reason why this situation happened was because of someone trying to go back into their vehicle with no weapon, and they just happen to be a person of color. And it's like the dynamics, the contrast, the way that the pillars are, it's like, we talking about what? what we doing? You want me to do what for work? You want me to sit and listen to another what? You want me to tell you, define, and have you explain what? When I'm the one that has been successful in my role and I'm telling you what I want and what I need, and it's not even being met. And now I have to sit through another series of unfortunate events taking place outside of the dynamics of work. And you didn't want to acknowledge it this time around, right? When it was George Floyd, let's acknowledge it together. Now it's happened again, and it's kind of like, well, we did it back then, so we technically don't really have to do it right now. And it's like, no, you told me you want to make a difference, then I'm going to hold you accountable to being consistent in that difference and being consistent in how you are taking care of your employees. How are you engaging with them? How are you creating dialogue? How are you creating space for safety? So, for me right now, I'm charged up, right? Like I have so much I want to do, and it doesn't matter about what your outcomes are, what your deliverables are, or what your measurements of success, because this is a reoccurring issue that manifests itself in so many different ways, whether it's an email where there's passive kind of demeaning or disrespectful, banter regarding a student, which is something that happened in the midst of all this, that I'm like processing and understanding what's the most appropriate course of action to deal with this and address it. But these are all things that surround, and to me, my tolerance level to be, like a lot of my colleagues say, we just got to put our head down and just, do what we do, because they don't care about us. And I'm like, I'm at a point where I got to make them care. I'm at a point where every time we say, well, they just don't get it, I got to make them get it. Right. I'm taking that. I'm not saying everybody has to have that approach, but I'm saying for me to exist in this community, whether it's my job or this organization, you're going to see me, you're going to hear me, and to some degree, we're going to engage on how I feel being here, right? Like the imagery that often comes to mind for me is, anybody remembers the first episode of the Boondocks when Huey is at the picnic, at the cookout, and he goes around and he's telling people, Ronald Reagan is the devil, and he's like, all these different elements of truth. And the people in the at the picnic are just like clapping their hands and saying, he's so articulate and he's so well spoken. And I'm like, this is kind of my life magnified in an animated form. I felt like Huey many times trying to speak to many truths, and it's easy to just discount it and minimize it in the scope of how it's being said and how it's being delivered, and not the actual truth, and doing something with it to be proactive and change for the for positive sake, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. So when I jump in the screen and I'm looking, for those that only hear the audio version, I keep going deep into the camera, and the mic is nowhere near the focus point of the camera. So, when you hear those moments of silence where I'm just abruptly there's a video version that accompanies this audio dialogue where you can actually see the actions of what I'm doing. So, Chris Scott, thank you very much for asking me that question. I appreciate that.
Friend, yeah, it's a lot. Thank you for sharing. I'm in your corner. Like, all of it. Some of it I obviously can't understand, but some of it, I saw the same thing. I woke up this morning and went on Twitter because I'm dumb and I don't have good boundaries, and I jump on my phone, and I saw all that footage and put it together, and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's all compounding, right? It's like this isn't disconnected from George Floyd, and this isn't disconnected from 2016, and but in some ways, this one feels worse because the contrasting image that you described, that man unarmed, shot 7 times, kid walking around like he's Captain America, like first of all, what the hell? Like, what world do we live in when 17-year-olds can just assume legal authority and just walk around with assault rifles? Like, you all gave me permission to cuss 3 times. That is fucked up. Like, what the hell? Like, what is that? And yeah, and the fact that I saw that same video as you're describing it, like, I mean, I think we probably all process it from our own perspective and all that. And so, but thinking like, okay, I get what he's doing. He's running to the cops, but the fact that he just shot 3 people, and they just walk past him, like they drive past him and it's nothing. And Yeah, the hard thing, like, it's hard to have grace in those moments. Like, I just want to like be angry, but I'm reminded of that over the process. I've learned the grace piece. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm sorry. Even the secondary piece you were talking about, like now having to reflect all this to your organization, to your workplace, based on who you are and what they assume of you, and them focusing on how you're saying it and not what you're saying or what you as a human are going through. Gosh, that sucks. So thanks for sharing.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, just to kind of even deep, just give a little bit more of a gem, there's a video prior to the events that took place where he's interacting with, law enforcement, and law enforcement are acknowledging him by saying, "Thank you for doing this job. And do you want some water?" And so, it doesn't get better in light of what's happening. It's only painting a picture that, really shows the differences in kind of the worlds that we live in. Right. And so, that goes into,
I
a
don't believe.
lot of injustices that we see. Oh, June, come on.
Okay, thank you. I don't think it's painting a picture. This is media. It's saying something. What is it stating? But before we get into that, I want to thank Chris Scott. Thank you so much for what you said. And Sunil, thank you for sharing. I heard a little bit about recent events that have gotten national attention. But if I may, here in LA, we've been protesting every day. There's been a protest. There was a protest for the fallen Anthony McLean. If we don't mind taking a moment of reverence for his life that was lost in Pasadena. Thank you. And also, I went to a protest where the family was there and had a chance to share peace on their behalf. But there was also a another family who had also had a loss, Eric Rivera, and he was fallen as well. If you don't mind taking a moment of silence for Eric Rivera. Thank you. And his mother, Valerie, had said something so key. She said, "They took my son, but they gave me power." So that was a chant that rung throughout that protest, that they gave her what? Power. I just wanted to share that's what's going on right now in LA, amongst everything else. So forgive me for battling my humanism, because right now it's a heart issue. If I may share, when you're a part of the Black and Brown community, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the excuse to say, "Oh, that happened last week. Oh, that happened last year." You have your heart is constantly sore, and it's ripped open with the reality that it may be you next time. Those are my thoughts.
No,
I
thank you, June.
I'm morbid, but if there's ever a time to express and to be real and to be transparent, now's the time. Now's the time to speak up. Now's the time to be blunt, to be brave with your words and with your actions. So I just want to encourage everyone to do the same.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, it's really the silence that's morbid. Not talking about it. It's the lives and the souls that are silenced. It's the voter suppression. It's the the lack of food safety, food deserts. It's the lack of housing that we see in metropolitan cities. It's the impact that a pandemic is having on the Black and Brown community, on top of like navigating for survival just in traffic. Um, like Anthony McLean is like, there's video evidence of him running away from the police. And when you talk about Jacob Blake and him being paralyzed and from the waist down, and the fact that that he's alive, the fact that he wasn't actually arrested, and now the fight is different. I think it continues to evolve. I think the root is the same. With what we're fighting is the same, but the voices um, are not what's morbid. It's the complacency, of still a young country who was built, um, on deplorable morals and oppression and de- uh, debased dehumanization of people. And I think what's happening in media, what's happening in entertainment, where we have now uh, entertainers, athletes, professional athletes withholding work, right? They're not boycotting. They're not not buying something, um, right? They're on strike, and right, the last time it happened in the NBA was 1950, um, where Bill Russell and a handful of Celtics did the same thing, withheld work, um, and today being 4 years since Colin Kaepernick first took a knee, but in 1996, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, wait, Mahmoud, yeah, Abdul Rauf, he was an NBA player, and he was the first NBA player to take a knee or not stand actually during the national anthem in the 90s, and he was blackballed for it, and only played in the league 9 years. He's now playing in Ice Cube's the Big Three league, so he's still capable of playing basketball. Still loves the game. Um, but it's interesting, right, that he's not being interviewed. It's interesting that Anthony McClain's murder is not national news, um, and like we know a whole bunch of people, um, probably between the four of us, who were murdered, and their their lives being taken is not national news, and where we know that Native peoples and trans peoples are the most endangered minorities in America, um, and they're they're almost voiceless. They're left out, looked over, and we have to do all the talking, um, until their stories are heard. Um, and we have to continue to lift those folks up, and we have to continue to be um, allies, and not make names for ourselves, and not build ourselves up, which we see with some journalists. uh, they do what they can to fundraise, and none of the money gets where it needs to go. um, and every journalist's job is to cover the story, but their tone and their methods for doing so um, are varied, and they live on a spectrum of morality. And I think it's as we are not journalists, but creatives who try to make sense of this world. I think that's what we try to create. Is um, try to create love, from the pain that we see. Try to create um, hope um, from the darkness. Try to point out the stars that exist. In the darkest nights we have. It's interesting that we're in the space now where we get to um, look to those who are speaking their truths, and their mics are not loud enough. Their audio is not good enough for the status quo, and so we have to do our part. Uh, as cisgender folks, we need to um, continue to speak, and then invite others because it's not just the black man that's endangered. I think we're all in danger of losing our loved ones, at any moment, on any street, on any on ramp, um, on any off ramp, any stoplight, you know, you don't even have to be in a car. Like you can just be home, and not make it to work, because of no knock warrants. Like it's out of control. But it's the same America, that we've lived in this whole time, and the same way that America, doesn't teach about finances in its educational system, right? It also doesn't teach about triumph for people of color, right? It talks more about struggle for people of color in history, and every everything that's covered in history, everything that we use as far as tools go has their origin is kind of cut off to not give credit, past its European acclamation, and so like we have to fight for our history. We have to learn our history. We have to educate ourselves, not just on what's happening now and these current events, but also learning of methods, learning of ways that the people before us made change to get us this far, because we have to be creative in our next steps. We have to be creative in our alliances. We have to be creative in our organization, in our mobilization, and we have to be creative in our shrewdness and in our cleverness, because the oppression is embedded, the trauma is embedded, the racism is insidious in its institution and in each institution, and we have to continue to listen to each other. I think that's what I appreciate most about all of us being here today, this evening, is opportunity for us to listen, because the American experience is definitely varied, and there's not one way to navigate all this stuff in America. And so I'm glad that we get to hear from all of you guys today.
Right on, right on. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That is super necessary. Kind of, to kind of cascade or ice skate through it, right? Brings me to Chris Scott. So, Chris Scott, why don't you let people know what has brought you to the table of Lyrical Ones today?
Well, thank you all for sharing that, and I feel like we could there's on these subjects we could keep going forever, and thanks for letting me listen and be a part of it. And I love you guys as best I can as fellow people, humans. And even I love, Alex, your quote or your reference to the Dr. King quote, like seeing the stars in the darkness, seeing the stars in the night, like the light. There's a lot of times I want to give up on America or like give up on our community. But there's so much light, there's so much hope and promise. And I think we're all trying to build to that. And it's not a zero-sum game where it's like this side or that side. It's all of us together. So yeah, thanks. So I've been a big fan of LO for a while. As somebody on the peripheries, I went to some, back in the day, some Undivided shows. My entry is through OD Greg Stewart II, who is my co-pastor at Oak Life Church. And so we became friends 2014 or 2013, around that time. We were starting this community in Oakland, thinking through a Christian community with these values underneath it, of inclusion, of justice, of rethinking things from the ground up. And Greg was a part of that from the beginning, and it really has helped. It wouldn't be, Oak Life wouldn't exist without Greg, Pastor Greg. And so through Greg, I got introduced to Christian, Cross, and some of you, and just been friends over the years. Like the best gift of all this is like friendships. Like who cares about institutional structures we develop or whatever? It's like, I get to meet some amazing humans, and this is a gift. Like, that's what life's about. Yeah, that's kind of the introduction. I have been a fan and like stoked on what's all going on. I wish I was more talented. I do consider myself an armchair poet, but I don't have bars in the hip hop sense, though I'm a fan. But I will claim that at Greg's bachelor party, we recorded a song together. That was like his request, and I did the guitar for it. So I don't know if that grafts me into the community in some sorts artistically, but
bars manifest himself in many ways.
Exactly,
Bars.
exactly. Bars exist before the words are put down. What do you mean? What do you mean?
It's good. I appreciate it. I'll take it. I'll receive that.
Like if you write at any point words that you are not quoting, then you are an artist.
Yeah, but I see what some of you guys do and some of you all do, and it's beautiful. And I'm at a different level.
I mean, it's all like we all have a different role, right? Like your finger does a different thing than your foot does, right? But it's still a part of the body, and that doesn't undermine the importance of it. It's just different. And I think that how much your bars is, right? Like it ain't just what you rap. Like bars, for those that remember, is how you can move in the car, how you move the car, your handles of the car having bars. So in this sense, I mean, how much bars can you have when you decide to start your own church? I mean, take me through that process. You say that it's can't gloss over that. What brought you to that crossroads where you're like, okay, it's time for me to kind of build my own place of worship? So take me from the prior and then take me to the action.
All right, I'll try. I mean, it's like telling the story of lyrical opposition. Like it's an endless story with lots of different perspectives. But the summarized version is I consider myself a Christian, but didn't grow up in the church, and so didn't have a lot of the baggage and like some of the conservative ideology, and had lots of friends outside the church, and was always like, hey, I want to talk about this stuff with like my friends who are gay or who like aren't straight white dudes, like who fit this certain mold or whatever, or like maybe they wouldn't go to a church for some reason. And I had those friends. Like in high school, I was like in a band, and we played Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco all the time, and I had this community of artists in a sense. And so like that was where my heart was with those sorts of folks. And it just the type of music was punk rock. And so and this is true of a lot of artist communities, like what catapults people into creativity is some sort of marginalization. Punk rock is like this fringe, kind of prophetic art, like rock and roll segment, where there's a critique back at culture from a lot of people who have been like, whether they were bullied in high school or they just didn't fit in or they didn't want to do the status quo and the rat race and all that. And so a lot of my formation as like a young person came in that scene, which the church told me was like demonic, but it actually was like, I learned life. I made deep friends. Like, sure, there were some things that were unhealthy. But at the same time, like these are beautiful people that like are open to spiritual conversations. They're not going to your church because you take one look at them and like be like, nah, like who are these people? Like clean up before you come in. So I think that heart underneath it was that sort of sentiment of like, what would it look like to create a space for some of our friends? And early on, there were a handful of us who had that conversation from the beginning. It was very decentralized. It wasn't like me. I like really don't like a lot of Christian leadership discussions. I don't like a lot of the typical pastor imagery, like the CEO business leader has all the answers, like leads the flock, has a flock, and even that language, right? You see like the patriarchal like power dynamic. So for me, there was some like pushback against that vibe, and so it was very community led, And so a few of us started gathering in our apartment and talking about it, trying to like be a part of our broader community, serve our city as best we could. And Greg was part of that, who is also a founding member of, I think at the time, Lyrical Opposition was just getting started. And so we just talked through like, what would it look like to start something for people we love here, that would include people who have been marginalized or wouldn't normally fit in. And so we did that for about a year, and about 20 people kind of started hanging with us. And then we started doing like a public gathering, and it's kind of grown ever since. That was like back in 2014. And so we're in Oakland, California, which, as you all know, like the Bay Area in general, Oakland, I think in specific, is just a dynamic city that's like incredibly diverse. It sits at the intersection of every social conversation we're having as like a country, from race to like the environment to class to gentrification, all of it. And so homelessness. So as a church, how do we like hold our faith in the midst of all those things? And so that's formed who we are. And that's kind of the story. So we started back in 2014, and I've kind of grown organically through relationships gradually over time. And it's been fun. There's been so many stories of healing, so many folks who have been like kicked out of church or were marginalized in some way because of who they were, whether it was they're a woman who wants to like speak at church, or they're like a person of color in a largely suburban white context, or they're a part of the LGBT plus community. And so many of those stories have like, folks have found some sort of home and safety and healing. And that's like a gift to me, like that somehow this community offers healing and hope and a second chance at spiritual life and connection to the divine. That's that was me a couple minutes. That was me trying to summarize. That's my best summary I can do.
Not bad.
I mean, there's more to it than that,
back.
though. You know, it's like,
sure.
yeah, you know, it's like when did you realize that, you know, kind of the fundamental cookie cutter Christian archetype wasn't for you? Like, when did you come to that realization that like my discovery, relationship, and exploration of spirituality and God isn't limited to what you presented me with, it's beyond? Like, when did you come to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I cut my teeth doing ministry, like doing youth ministry. I think a lot of people get into like pastoral work, start working because they start young. They start working with teenagers or youth. And I think the conversation is the rawness that kids like bring to stuff. Like they got no baggage. They're just asking a question. Like, so I think that season, like, for instance, the second church I worked at when I was in seminary was a church that didn't allow women in ministry, like to be officially pastors. And that's a pretty common position, actually, like amongst American Christians, global Christians. And there was like a 13-year-old girl who was like, I think I want to be a pastor. And I remember their official church stance was like, nope, sorry, you can't. You don't got the right genitals. Like, sorry, that's it. And me thinking like, okay, this is the second time I'm going to cuss on the episode. That's fucked up. Like biblically, so then I had to go back to like my own interpretation of our tradition, the text and all that, and start to see like, oh, these interpretations are not like, they're so rigid and they're not accurate. And there's other ways to look at these things. So I would say like some of those early moments, like when I start to actually be asked the question and have to ask the questions. So that's my like early 20s maybe. And so from then on, I was like, all right, I got a lot of issues with the church. Like I love it. The church like gave me my best friends, my wife, like my sense of like love and identity and like meaning and purpose, all these like amazing things that are so valuable and a connection, to God. But man, we got a lot of stuff wrong too. So I think that started back then.
So where do you come from? Like, where did you grow up? And then kind of what was the dynamics like growing up where you were?
I grew up here in the Bay Area, East Bay, mostly like a suburban context in the Tri-Valley. And that's like where I went to high school. My family's like deeply rooted in the Bay Area. Like it goes some like aunts and uncles, grandparents, all that stuff, like Richmond. Actually, my mom's side of the family, like they settled in Irish immigrant family that settled in San Francisco. And there's like
Hey,
stories of like, we have down in Colma where there's more dead people than living people. We've got like
right.
a whole plot of land, or it's pretty much full from folks, but like there's like stories
Shout
of,
out Tacoma.
yeah, it's a cool town. But yes, here in the Bay Area, mostly in a more suburban context, but like even that in the Bay Area is different than like other places because it is just more diverse. Like friends from all different backgrounds, all different parts of the world, all that. Yeah. So I lived in the Bay Area with the exception of a few different places, but this has been home. And we've been in Oakland for 7 years, 8 years, something like that.
Okay. And like, how
Yeah.
was like, what did high school look like? Like, was this a predominantly, or was it mixed? Was it diverse? Like, what did high school look like for you?
So my high school experience is varied. So the majority of my time was at a high school called Foothill High School in Pleasanton, California, which is very white. That said, it's still pleasant. Like there's some diversity, relatively speaking, but I also went to a continuation school. So part of that punk rock phase I mentioned,
Hey.
I almost like got booted out of school, almost dropped out, was going to like move into a van with my friends and just tour the country in our band. And so legally I had to go to, I couldn't do that because I was like 16 or something. So I went to a continuation school, which was basically like the last stop. It's like a county school for all the kids who were on the verge of like going to juvie basically. And so that was a year and a half. And that was really, a very different exposure because you're seeing kids who have rough backgrounds. And the reason they're struggling isn't like just their fault. It's like, they don't have choices. They don't have opportunities. And so like that struggle breeds more struggle. So yeah, there's a little bit of that. So it's kind of mixed. But even when I was at Foothill, I had like, I don't think I went to a single like football game, like all the traditional stuff people are connected to their school with. Like I was over school. We were just basically like hanging out in Berkeley. This is me before really coming to faith. Like we're just getting drunk every weekend at punk rock shows in Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco. And that's where a lot of my high school was season-wise. Okay. That's my connections, my friend group and all that stuff.
Yeah, Chris, I find that interesting that your identity and your like affection for what people would consider the other is only like amplified, I think, in your spirituality. How did you decide on a stance for your church home in being a welcoming place and of allyship for those who are marginalized in the Bay Area, in Oakland?
Man, I think that's as central to the Christian faith as anything. Like, if you're not like, if it doesn't move, if Christianity doesn't disrupt the center, the power structures, and embrace the margins, you're reading it wrong. Like, you're reading it in like a American white picket fence kind of filter, where it's like, if it's just keeping you safe and making you a good citizen, then you're not following the guy who advocated for those in the margin, was crucified as a criminal by the police state. Like that's the center of the faith. Jesus, like that's the whole thing. So I don't know when that would have happened. As a community, it was pretty clear that like we were a diverse church, and we valued relationship over dogma, and we wanted to embrace those in the margins. Like we're not perfect by any means. Like I think we got a lot of issues with class. Like we're largely a young church. Most people who have like decent jobs, and we love the homeless community, but there's not like homeless folks at our church, like houseless folks. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that value is just, it's baked into any honest read of, or any honest connection to the life of Jesus. Like you can't, yeah.
No, I dig it. I mean, just to shout out the Tri Valley area for those that don't know. My relationship to the Tri Valley area has been one of a spectator. and more like it's more like treated like rumors and like mythos, right? Like Black Hawk,
Oh yeah,
Danville, and
dude.
like those areas. Like I'm gonna just give you my insight, my history, and my interaction. So San Francisco born and raised. And there was a period of time when I had to go to Pittsburgh, California. Like I remember my friends in middle school, they thought I took a jet to class because they were like, "You come from Pennsylvania?" And I'm like, "No, there's a Pittsburgh in California. Like it's not. It's like an hour away." So I made the transition in a period of time for high school to go to Pittsburgh High, and that's when I started to understand kind of Contra Costa, the area, and the kind of outlay of certain like aspects of it, right? And so when anybody talked about Black Hawk or Danville, it was like that's where the rich people live. Like that's where the people with money live. Like that's where you go where you don't know the street names and you could get lost because if you're not from there, then you probably shouldn't be there. And I remember one night I'm getting ready to go back from the city, and this is way after high school. Like I'm going to SS State, and I'm still at my parents' house, and I was at Powell Station, downtown San Francisco, right in the thick of it all, and I run into 9 drunk white girls, and I'm like worried because I'm like, y'all good, we're on bar, you could fall, hit the train track, it's a wrap. I fell on the train tracks. It's not fun. You don't have to get electrocuted. You could just get hurt. And so I'm talking to them and I find out they from Danville. So I end up being on BART with them for like a whole hour as I try to help them navigate BART being drunk, to me in my eyes, being vulnerable. And at the same time, like trying to ensure their safety. Like they was throwing up. I was like helping them manage the whole situation. But it was a situation where on the outside, I just didn't know anything about Danville. And then I had this close interaction where we're talking, and when we're now building these bonds, albeit me feeling like I don't want nothing to happen to y'all. But on the other side, it was like we had a real human moment. So shout out to Danville. Shout out to all them lovely people from out there. I know that sometimes it's easy to get a bad rep depending on who's giving the story and kind of the narration. But it, to me, oftentimes wasn't presented as a place of diversity. It wasn't placed as a place where it was much of an open-mindedness. I mean, even for me going to Pittsburgh High and having conversations and how the church would show up, because it was like, I never forget, I went to see Passion of the Christ with my girlfriend. She went to a church out in Pittsburgh, and they ended up taking over the movie theater and having a sermon, and they were dictating to us like the rules of engagement in Christianity. And I was like, I come from San Francisco. You can't tell me that gay people going to hell. I'm like, what, bro? Come on. What? You can't tell me. I've been around these people. I love these people. I care about these people. And now you telling me, oh, because this is who they are. Well, finito la música. That's it. They ain't got nothing else to do. And I'm like, I think there's a place for love in all places. And for any of us in this context to make the determination, especially after watching this movie, of what really is to happen and who's to say what is. I mean, you're entitled to your interpretation, but not so much for me. And so, it's just one of those things where it's easy to lose sight of the context when people don't have a clear understanding. Because for me, when I hear you say you got into punk rock and you kind of was like, I need to kind of break free from a lot of these different limitations and restrictions on my faith, I need to be able to broaden that and grow that. I think that's a beautiful thing, because most people never get the opportunity to have that moment of, aha, like this may not be the end of the road or the journey. It just may be my path is now going off in a different direction. And I think that, it's important when I hear, you started a church with OD. I'm like, what? Like, hold on, let's take it back, because people don't realize like the Tri-Valley area is an area that oftentimes you don't hear anything about. Like in the most recent times, it's more so brought up in the news for people trying to bust in homes and rob something. But beyond that, you really don't hear anything about it. And so here that you're coming out of that with a your own perspective on what it is that you're seeking and what you're trying to help others kind of facilitate and go through, I think is a very powerful thing. But given kind of the world we live in, how do you see the shift on what church really is? Because I mean, we're talking about the practice of worship and having quote unquote house of worship, and now that it looks very different. I mean, you look at the dynamics of where we're at right now. We're not in each other's face in person. We're in our own worlds. And so I'm just interested of, what does that look like? What is the practice of faith and church look like moving forward, the construction of faith and worship?
It's good. I got so many funny stories about like Black Hawk and those spaces too, man. Because it is a different world. Like for those who don't know, like, so yeah, that's the reputation of some of the Tri Valley communities, which is not, I would say it's largely like middle class communities. And so, well, I was a youth pastor at a church out there for a while, and the kids who were the most like grounded and balanced came from Dublin and Castro Valley and Hayward, like, and I could pin it to like, oh, there's no pretentiousness, there's no insulation from like struggle. There's actual diversity at the schools are going to. Like everyone's got struggles, right? Rich, poor, like we're all humans. We're all going to be struggling. But there's a gift of being around other human beings and different perspectives that shapes you that is a gift. And it's a necessity thing. It's like, so I got so many stories there, man. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I could tell you stories of weddings I've done with like the most wealthy person I've ever met in my life. And I actually, and I'm not one to judge because I think like I have relative privilege and wealth, like compared to the world. But like one of the areas I really struggle with in judgment is of like the excessively wealthy. It like infuriates me. I once was at sorry, this isn't what the question you asked.
No, it's all good. Take it there. It's all good. We can come back to that. I know where we at.
Thank you. I once did one Saturday morning, I was with a bunch of ministry kind of folks here in Oakland, like incredibly diverse group of people. We're all kind of sharing about our different work. And some of the folks there, are like, it's a struggle. They're like, it's an all Black church in a poor neighborhood, and they've been grinding for decades. And we're all sharing and trying to be together. And we're also making a pitch to this one church to resource. Like, hey, we need some money for this, or if there's stuff out there. And some of those stories were just like, they're doing such amazing in the trenches work with people to like love people, serve people, give people food, shelter, like minister to physical and spiritual needs. And then that night I go to a fundraiser in one of those gated communities. It was called Ruby Hills. And it was a fundraiser for a nonprofit that I'm connected to. And one of their like wealthy donors opened up their house. And I remember asking the wife, the mom of this family, like about the house. And I was like, how many bathrooms are in this house? And she didn't know the answer. Like she's like, yeah, I never thought about it. I was like, what is this? Like, what world do we live in? Like, you have this giant property with 2 koi ponds. Here we are talking about human trafficking, drinking wine. Like, what I was like raging inside. I just wanted to burn the place down, which is not, I think, necessarily what Jesus would ask me to do. But that's how I felt about it, especially in contrast to like my brother Aaron, who's doing like God's work in Richmond, California. And then I'm in here. And so I get all that, man. But yeah, I really appreciate your ability to discern the humanness in the midst of whatever context and stereotypes we have of each other. That's the real stuff, trying to find the commonality and see each other's souls underneath it all.
I mean, it really is. And I mean, just to kind of touch on that, just in what you said, like, it's not so much a judgment as it is of the impact and how it made you feel, right? Like, you weren't casting a judgment on saying they're horrible people. It was you being able to bridge the gap between those with and those without, and having that absurdity of like, yo, it's people with half a toilet and you can't even equate what it is you really have. Like, and it's not to say like they're bad for it, but it is to say that what world do I live in where this exists and there's such a huge disparity, and then how do I close that gap? Because that's really what you were there to do. You were trying to close the gap on those two ends, and in the midst of trying to close the gap, you then are confronted with the other end of the spectrum where it's like, yo, you don't know how many rooms you have that have flushable toilets. For those that don't know, in the audio only version, I'm staring sarcastically into the screen when I say that, because it is a thing where it's like, yo, it's a struggle in the morning for some households to have to share a bathroom, let alone if the bathroom is in working order. And then to have that, kind of other side of it where it's like, okay, I'm going to come to engage, build a relationship. And I ask you a simple question, and you not being able to answer it has now manifested itself in a range of emotions. So I feel it, man. But, as we proceed to give you what you need, what is it called, ecclesiology? Is that what it's called? Like, that's the kind of the construction, or how do you maintain and have or erect a place of worship? And so in this new age, as I said before, what does that look like as we are in the tech only zone, social distance zone?
Oh man, you got an answer?
I mean, look, I got a lot of different things, but we save that for another time. You give me your thoughts, your perspective. What is what do you hope to see as the practice, at least for right now or moving forward?
I used to hate the idea of online church. I like, my conviction is like, I'm all about human relationship. Like, I might become a chaplain later on, like a hospital chaplain, like in the next stage of my life, because my wife's a nurse. I'm connected to some folks who are like in those settings, and there's nothing like holding somebody's hand and being present to them, and like just being with them. And so I've always been like, yeah, it's all about actual relationships. Like, it's the digital church thing, like streaming it, all that stuff, that's all consumer based. Like, you're just consuming a show. Church is not a TV show. It's not a flashy product. It's not like production. It's not the cameras and smoke machines and laser lights. And so I've always been like, no, we're an in-person community. We're all about, like, you got to know people. You got to know their stories. They got to know you. And so, like, I hated like churches that broadcast the pastor to multiple campuses. Like, that just feels weird to me. It's like cultish or something. It's getting late. I'm getting on my high horse and stuff. I don't usually get this. So I always had an apprehension about like digital church. And now that's the only thing we got. Like, I'm pretty like, I feel a conviction that we need to value safety in this moment. And church is more than a Sunday show. It's more than even a gathering on Sundays. It's like a connection that we have at a spiritual level between people. And so it's almost like it's a mystical body. Like, we're in this together somehow. And so I think, I don't know the answer besides we have to like just lean into one another. We have to lean into this time. We have to intentionally choose community, which means we got to use whatever methods we have. I have a friend who is a hospital chaplain, and this time people have to die alone because you can't really go into the hospitals. They're not really letting people be exposed to one another in terms of potentially passing on COVID. And so a lot of people are saying goodbye to their loved ones through a screen. Like, they're being given an iPad, and like, that's the only avenue you have to be with people in that moment, if there's a chance to say goodbye. And my friend who's a hospital chaplain is like trying to make that work. And it's not the same. It just isn't the same, but it can be something. It can be a connection to something deeper. And that's the thing. So like, I've been drawn into like, how do we find that deeper connection between one another in this time? And I think it's a lot of intentionality. Like, our church doesn't have membership, but in this season, we're like, maybe we need some sort of commitment, because if not, we're all going to drift apart. Like, the world right now is chaotic and is drawing us away from each other. And so what sort of like covenant do we need to make with one another to say, hey, we are in this, we are a family, we're going to love one another. And with whatever avenues we have, we're going to do that. So for us, we do like a YouTube service and a lot of midweek kind of gatherings like this on Google Meet or whatever, trying to like keep that connection alive. And I do think at some point we'll be able to slowly, gradually go back to in-person stuff. But I think we have to like really, really root ourselves in that deeper connection of like, I see you on a screen, and I know that's not the same as seeing you in person, but in my soul and my gut, I'm going to choose to like hold you as a person and your soul and pray for you and like be connected. and know and see the image of God in you, even if I can't see it in person. Is that kind of an answer?
I
I'm
mean,
curious. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, it's a big experiment, right? Like it's one of those, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. I apologize in advance. Please forgive me. But this goes to the leaders who thought it was a good idea to take away in-person visits at jails. Cause now guess what? Look at the world you live in, right? You took it away from people who, regardless of why they're there, they're still people and they still have relationships and they still have bonds and ties. And you tried to fracture it. And now we're all in the same boat, right? Where, God forbid, a loved one ends up in the hospital. I can't go and see them. And I think that that's kind of the thing that we have to really be clear and understanding on, is now we're reduced to the things that we used as forms of control to maintain some semblance of power, and now we don't have any power. And so I commend you for just acknowledging and saying, you know what, safety comes first in this time, but how do we work within it? How do we create? How do we innovate in our connection with building bonds? And how do we explore it? And I think it's an experiment. It is an experiment. It's crafting kind of the boundaries you need for this to be what people can utilize at the end of the day, right? Is for them to be able to use, but how do you give the boundaries or create the framework, right? Like when you think of a church, it has to have pews and it has to have acoustics and it has to be able to house people in a certain capacity. And I think now we have technology and we have the means in our mind to create those practices, to form out those walls, to give those stained glass, what is it that we want to see and how do we want to see it, to give people the interaction of feeling included, to feel a part of, and to belong to something. And I think that I really think it's in the want more so than the how, right? Like if you have the want
Yeah.
to do it, then how it happens will come about, but it will have to be in your willingness and openness and acceptance of kind of submitting to the crisis at hand, because this is a crisis, right? Like it is an ongoing crisis. I've talked to my colleagues and we responded as a crisis, and now it's giving people space to adapt to a new crisis. This is the new state of the world. This is the new norm, a crisis state. And I think that you're taking that by not dismissing and minimizing anything. You're really owning it and you're really trying to figure it out. And like, to me, one of the best ways when we have these large facilitations is to use the framework of whatever platform we're using to build out the rules of engagement and to constantly repurpose it. Whether that's saying, okay, everybody who puts your name in the chat, now I'm going to copy and paste it. So this is the order of discussion moving forward. And you don't have to say anything, but now we have order, right? Because that's the biggest thing when you're on the Zoom is I say something, you say something, and I've cut you off, right? And Zoom doesn't have the bandwidth to hear 20 voices at once. It can literally only hear one person at a time. So how do I give you the platform to say we're going to share the mic? Well, let's have order. Let's say we're going to follow this. And if you say something, you say something. If you don't, you don't. So with that, I'll fluent step up to the mic.
And I think that's all right, Chris. Hold on.
You're
I think I just because I think this is really kind of the beauty of where we are right now is that it's breaking down like the fundamentals of what it means to be in relationship with people. Like if you have a pen pal relationship, it's a relationship because of the intentionality where someone is allocating time not just to read your message but also to allocating time to send a message to you intentionally on purpose, without proximity. And we're there right now, like God is like is in a relationship with me because of my intention to him and his intention to me, not just the attention, right? And what we get to see now is that community, like you said, right? It has to be sought, right? We have to seek that community. It has to be on purpose. It has to be intentional. It's taken what's happened is the substitute has been taken away. So now you have to do it on purpose, for you to call it community. And it's like the same way that a building has to house the souls in it. The agreement in the community has to be big enough to house the community that it wants to include, right? And so even if it's a growing group, a growing congregation, right? That agreement, those agreements between one another has to be big enough to welcome other people in. And it doesn't have much to do with, how many times we meet virtually, right? It matters more, what does that intention look like? Do we make time for each other to not be oblivious or ignorant to what's happening in each other's lives, right? It's like I say, I have people who, were coworkers or people who were friends, and when I see them, post, right, like just like everyday things, and now we don't live in an everyday world, like where they're not reading the room, where they don't have a pulse, they don't have a beat on the pulse of what's happening in the world right now. It lets me know where they are in my community, just by their intention. And again, right, it's not me vilifying them, but it's where they want to, right? It tells me about their intention to be a part of what's happening and lifting voices and bringing awareness to what's going on. At the same time, when I see someone post, a video of violence, right, it still lets me know, where their intention is, even if it's misguided, and whether it matters to them, what other people are consuming when they, put it out there. And so I think we're in a really beautiful spot right now, because the people that want to know have to learn about it. It's not just going to come to you on accident. And there's no excuse for why you don't know what's happening, to the marginalized people in the world.
No, definitely. I mean, there's some excuse. There's always somebody always got it. They can find it. People are creative, and you know what?
Thank
There's
God for
something that
people being creative.
I want to say something that Chris Scott said that has been reoccurring, because I mean, it even touches back on last week when we talking with when we're talking, was it Seth? So when Seth had brought up the idea of forgiveness, right, and like that ability to let go, right, and like really think about that, like he touched on that, and it was then connected to me and hearing Chris Scott say having grace, right, having grace in a moment of like, how do I process this with a level of grace, right? How do I sift through my anger to engage a gracefulness, and how I'm able to connect with the people who will make those excuses as to why they don't know, right? There's that thread, right, from forgiveness to grace, to still being able to allow those people to say those excuses, to let them kind of fester in what they need to do of ignorance, to then say, hey, guess what? There's people suffering, there's people going through things, and without me beating you over the head with it, without me creating a divisive line between you and me, I need to engage you in some practice of love, so I can open your mind to the atrocities that are plaguing us all as a collective, right?
Right. Like me, I'm not mad at them. It's like if somebody don't flush the toilet, like I'm offended a little bit, but I'm gonna flush the toilet anyway and do what I gotta do. It's like I'm not gonna say, "Oh man, you are not in my family anymore." I'm not gonna disown nobody. They're not removed for the community. I'm not gonna hold on to it in that sense. But like, if you don't flush the toilet, you gotta hear something.
I mean, for
Somebody
real.
got.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I'm trying to get people accustomed to the love language, right? Like if I need to
Yeah.
say it in a heated fashion, and I feel like you need this spice, then I need to coach you up
Right.
and build you up to get ready to take this spice, right?
Right. I need that
you,
grace
yeah,
also. Right.
exactly.
Right.
Because it
Grace and spice, man. Like Bro, you didn't flush the toilet.
There's a gracefulness in the spice. That's the thing that to me is lost. You can't
Yeah,
lose
for
the
sure.
nuance, the passion, and the energy. Like
Right, this is
compassion
important
and
to me.
grace isn't limited to just saying I can't be angry, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean I can't go through the motions, right? I have to go through the motions. And as we are a collective, I think it's important for us to give space to not feel threatened or to not feel like there's a possibility of a negative from someone going through the motions and us witnessing it and experiencing it with them. And so, I just feel like people gonna make them excuses, but it also highlights what I like to bring up in connection to we go from the practice of how we engage with worship in the church, but then Chris Scott, what do you see as kind of the way we move forward in this political structure and this the election season that we're in right now? Like, how do you see that playing a role, whether it be for yourself or within the church or your congregation? Like, what are the different things that you perceive as, well, how do we move forward?
Oh man, I could talk politics.
Yes, he
but
can.
I feel like there's a couple times like June like nodded her head or said something. I just haven't heard from you in a moment.
I know there's so many different times that I just want to jump in.
Can I shift that question? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Where have you like experienced community in this time? We were talking about like connection and how to stay connected and all that. I'd be glad to talk politics and tell people how to vote. But I'd love to hear like where are you finding community right now?
Right now, I've been spending a lot of time with a group called We the Movement. It's a Black Lives Matters based march and protest group. So I would say if not every week, then every other week, I'm downtown at City Hall, and you start to see other grassroots organizations come together, and you start to make friends, not just, oh, you're only a part of this movement, or your organization has this kind of name, so only hang out with this. No, you see everyone joining and banding together. But thank you so much for asking. I appreciate that. Real quick, I just wanted to add a little tidbit that I know that Sin had said something about the interpretation and interpreting the Word of God. And Chris, I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on? I know some may have different interpretations, but I think it really comes down to the application. Like, how can we see the life of Jesus throughout the lives of others? And I digress. I lost where else.
Maybe like how do I interpret? No, you're right. What do you call it? The orthodoxy versus orthopraxy, like practice. Yeah, that's where things matter. Like, who cares if you can parse a Greek verb ending? But what does your love look like in practice? Like, and I think that's where we should interpret these ancient, complicated texts through the lens of love and loving one another. And love, like, what love looks like. Like going back to like the LGBT community, like suicide rate is like, I think it's like 3 times as high amongst LGBT youth as it is straight youth. And so some of that is because the church has excluded, has villainized, has marginalized, has like all that stuff to that community. So, that doesn't look like love. Like, we got to at least rethink this. Like, what does a loving position? God is love, right? That's one of my favorite verses because it's like, it sums it all up real well. What does it look like to love? And so then how do we go back to these texts that were written in specific context with specific things? And so I'm way more interested in like people expressing and living into and receiving and giving genuine Christ-like love than I am in them understanding transubstantiation. Like, at the end of the day, or whatever the weird theological idea is, like, so I don't know if that is at all a response to your point, but I'm glad you're getting like what you're experiencing actually in some of the activism is community in practice, like, or that you're finding connection as you're doing the work, as you're trying to reflect love and justice in the world, you're connecting to other people. That's beautiful.
Thank you. And I do want to mention that I grew up in Hayward, California. And so that's where I really first got my sense of community at. And I moved.
Heart of the Bay.
I know. Oh, goodness. I moved to Las Vegas only to come back for college. And then I went to a really wonderful community group of on fire Jesus followers at Blazing Fire Church, and it's all around the Tri Valley. So they've been in Pleasanton, they've been in Dublin. But to answer your question in the spiritual aspect, that's where I would say my heart is anchored in community, or it has gotten that anchor.
I've been to that church. Yeah, actually, I went to college in Hayward. I spent a lot of time in Hayward. It's I love that city. Yeah. I lived in Vegas too for a little bit. It's kind of cool. Vegas is a crazy town.
It sure is. 24/7. Had to get out. LA's even crazier.
Words to all the complicated places we live in. Shout out to all the homes, because it's really home at the end of the day. You know, some homes we got to leave, some homes we stay. It's choices and decisions, everybody. That's what it is. I like what you said though. It's not the theory, it's the practice, right? Like I'm big on martial arts. Martial arts is my religion, right? And in time, the refinement of martial arts is explored through the execution and the experiences of others with martial arts, right? It's the actual practice, and then having to execute on that practice when the time comes. And you find in time, not everything's gonna make it to the next phase of life, right? Some things will reign supreme, and some things will be left off to the wayside as a moment in history. And I think that's kind of how the Bible, the Word of God, is, in the sense that as we move forward and we evolve, we have to evolve the words and the practice of those words to match where we're at, right? We're not perfect. It's not about the perfection. It's about the practice, right? Going back to what we've said many times before, the perfection's in the practice. It's not in being perfect, right? You can never be perfect, but you can practice perfectly, right? And practice perfectly is just consistent, right? Being disciplined, being religious. You see how these words all kind of circle around each other, these double entendres, but it's the truth in the matter of kind of having faith, right? Your faith is a practice that you refine. It's an engagement. It's a relationship. Relationships are practiced within themselves of communication, comprehension, the context. These are things that oftentimes we try to separate, and you know, as I've said before, like, you know, I don't identify as Christian, but that don't stop me from loving, caring, and understanding the Word of God, or understanding others' concern, love, and need, and worship. Like, there's no judgment. It's more so about how do we build, maintain community, how do we uplift and strengthen people. And so when y'all hear you say that, it's so important for me to hear, because, you know, I do have my relationship to, you know, kind of the Orthodox religion and the kind of structures that befall when we're introducing faith, and what that love looks like, because it is a love, right? It's just, how do we engage that love? Is this a healthy practice, or is this a practice that is a power dynamic, right? And I think that you're very much careful on, you know, I mean, you come from punk rock. How could you not be the dude who's like, we about to tear it up and change it. It's about to be different. We got to push against, right? What's more punk rock than that? It's the idea of pushing against the status quo. It's the idea of saying, like, you know what, we're more complex and we're more nuanced and we're so many layers, and those things need to be explored and show up. And I think that, you know, hearing that that's what you're doing at, you know, Oak Life, I mean, that's kind of like, people need it, right? People need that space, you know. And I think that that's amazing that you kind of have that. But I'm also interested in, like, what is that, you know, is this a passive worship or is this an active worship, right? Is this happening just amongst you and your coven of people, or is this something that you carry out into the community and say, you know, these are the ways we practice with our global world, our communal world, our neighbors, our, you know, the infrastructures that we're all a part of, the communities we show up in? Like, what is that? Is that, do you think that's kind of where you find yourself with your practice of worship is in taking it further than just us meeting for this moment, and how do we explore and practice it every day? Or is it just like, there's a time and place, and let's maintain some boundaries?
So the question, like, is it something that like is more personal or public?
Yeah,
Is
or
that
is it a thing where it's more personal, or do you look at it as a place for activism, right? Like, do you look at it as a place of engagement around kind of the world we're in, the current climate? We started off the conversation about, kind of the atrocities that have taken place in Wisconsin, but that also highlights kind of the political nature and world that we're in. That also highlights kind of, you brought up kind of the mental health aspect and people feeling belonging, and then they think their escape is to kind of commit a tragedy, right? Like they lose their life because they feel like they don't have a place, or they don't feel like they can be a part of a space. And so does your practice in faith, with the space you've created, the community you're cultivating, is it an activism, or is it, what this is just in the sense of decompression, and this is the sense of processing, and you choose the determination of how you kind of execute your own will?
yeah, that's a good question. I hope it's a both and. I hope it's like I did a bunch of earlier, and like my faith development. I read a lot of Mother Teresa, and she talks a lot about the need for like action and retreat, like, and that we as humans need that. Actually, I've been a part of a lot of activist circles, and that's a big thing. Burnout is huge. Like, the injustice of the world is beyond what any one person can hold. So you got to do your part, and then you got to go do self-care. You got to recharge. You got to connect to something bigger than you. You got to like be. And so I hope it's a both and. Actually, the model of Oak Life, the imagery has been of an oak tree that has roots and branches. We go deep together. We like get rooted. We find nutrients, whether that's through like spiritual practice or just community and togetherness. And we go out together. We provide perch and shade to the community. Like, people need it. We hopefully grow fruit that can feed and nourish others. We drop seeds that bring new life other places. So that kind of flow is like, that's the whole thing. I think and that's not just a religious thing. That's a human thing. I think we all need that. Like, if you're not engaged in some sort of service of others, in generosity financially, or concern for the poor, whatever the thing is, you're not a fully alive human. And if you're not also doing the work of self-care, self-reflection, growing your own like process, like attending to your own wounds, you're missing out too. You're out of balance. So I hope it's a both and. And there's actually, of all the churches I've been a part of, and I'm like, I know I'm like a pastor at Oak Life, but I actually don't like, I'm not that much in control. Like, most of the cool stuff that happens is not me. And that's the point. That's beautiful. It's like this community led thing, but there's a lot going on in the community. We have a community justice team. That's like, we have a racial advisory committee. We give away every third Sunday, like our offering to a different nonprofit. We've done LO a couple times actually. And so there's a lot of that stuff going on. There's always room for more. And I hope we can do more, but I hope it's a both and, because you need both. I think, at least I do. I can speak for myself.
I mean, not to kind of beat a dead horse, but you're right. Like, we talked about it last week. We talked about rest, right? Like, rest is a big thing, right? Actually, we talked about
it every. I think we're talking about it every week.
All right, you know what? This is the practice and the discipline, right? Say had brought it up, and it was the cocoonism, and rest is a big piece of being in the cocoon, right? Like, those vital moments for nutrients to heal. Like, for me, it's one thing when I have a dream and I feel rested in it. It's another thing when I'm panicking, I'm running around, and I'm like trying to survive a dream. And I think that rest is essential, because I mean, come on, like, even the idea of community, right? Like you said, belonging to something bigger than yourself, right? It don't have to be God. It could be your child. It could be a garden. It could be something outside of yourself, whatever you manifest it to be. But it's important because we're still in this. Like, you might feel alone. You might feel isolated. You might feel jaded. And I feel that. I understand it. I have my moments every day. I've been in service to the community for more than half my life. I've been doing this since I was a little fruit off the tree, right? And I think that when you say get rooted, right, like be planted, be grounded, right, be in the earth, because there's something about having something that brings you back down to a center, bringing you back down to something that's stable, right? Like none of us were born with wings. We haven't evolved to that point yet. So as a practice, it is good to kind of plant yourself firmly where you are and be in that. And I think there's nothing more present than having something that exists outside yourself that you answer to, that you respond to, right? I mean, work can be that, but I would push anyone listening to really think about it being beyond work, right? Think about having a plant that you talk to positively every day. Think about having something that, you know, maybe it's your child, and having that extra moment to have an interaction on a more focused, concentrated level for their well-being and their nurturing, just with the energy you bring to them. Like there's so many ways to explore that outside of yourself, what that element looks like, what that is. And I think it's important, because when you do for yourself and you only do for yourself, you will oftentimes find out you're not an island. Somehow, some way, as I've seen many, many times, the connection of the world will pop up on you. And it's not to push you into the idea. I'm not sitting there trying to like threaten you into it. It's this as my care for you exists, even if I don't know you, I have to let it be known. Like I've seen it happen. It's gonna happen. I've heard the stories of others, and they told me to tell you, right? Like it's okay to be a part of something. It's okay to care. And there's nothing wrong with what you've been through. We can get through it together if you choose to. So, you know, with that part, kind of the togetherness and the you painting the picture of like you in the practice of worship, and then how does that practice exist outside of your place of worship? That brings me to kind of, you know, where we as people intersect on another level of kind of faith, right? We have a faith system within politics, right? It's not to say that they're deities and they're gods, but we have faith that we appoint someone to a position to carry out on certain issues and certain topics and certain things. And so I'm interested because, you know, you sidestepped it the first time, but this time I really want to know, where does your vision for politics exist, and how do you maintain that, because that can be exhausting in itself?
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that question because it's a huge discussion. But generally, I'll say that as a Christ follower, my alliance is to that. And so if it wasn't for that, my politics would be so different. Like I think I probably would have been more moderate or conservative, but it's because of Jesus that I've been like, I have to care about those in the margins, like, and I have to rethink money and power and all of it. Again, that like my guy that I'm trying to emulate was murdered at the hands of the empire. And so the fundamental power structures of my faith are a critique of empire and a constant inclusion of the outsider. And so moving my politics, like the underlying values are things like love, compassion, equity, of seeing the other with love. So I don't think if anybody tries to peg Christianity into one of the two parties that we have, they're wrong. So fundamentally, I think Christianity transcends all that. That said, like the deeper values are, like how do we love those in the margins? How do we care for like the Old Testament categories, the widow, the immigrant, and the orphan? Like, so my voting, my selection of candidates should be filtered through, is this person going to help those people? And we might have different language for those categories nowadays, but like that's where it starts. That's the starting point. It's not, how does this person benefit my 501, 401k, or like my own security? It has to be those who are most vulnerable. And so that's where the starting point is right now. I mean, generally speaking, I think it's a mixed bag between the parties, but I would say it seems pretty, at the same time, clear that like the Democrats have more to offer for those categories. though they're flawed, and I don't think like Jesus is tied to that party by any means, I tend to vote left. And so a lot of times, like with a lot of grief in my heart, because I'm like, oh, this person, I don't trust them either. Like, and I have a fundamental distrust of politics. I was in a jogging club for a while, and there's a dear friend of mine who was a campaign manager for a local politician. And she was like, have you ever thought about running for politics? I was like, don't ever ask me that question to get in, because we will never be friends. Like, I will never, ever, ever go down that road. That's like, so maybe next to the judgment of the excessively wealthy, I have a judgment of the political class, though they are humans, and I do believe they deserve grace and love and compassion, all that stuff. So yeah, underlying value, I need to be concerned about those who are most vulnerable. My politics has to be informed by that, not my own well-being exclusively. And then just personally, yeah, I think we have a joke of a president, and he goes against everything that I believe in so many ways, and has exploited Jesus and Christians, has just leveraged American Christianity and like completely, I don't even have words, because he's done so much damage to the image, the reputation of Jesus's people. And it grieves me. I think it was like 80% of evangelicals, white evangelicals, voted for him. And right, Republican or Democrat, you get to vote for who you want to vote for. But like, there's so much hypocrisy in the stated values of those communities, and then their blind allegiance to this person who's clearly an ideologue, megalomaniac, and he's antithetical to Jesus to me. Trump is antithetical to Jesus. He's the opposite image in the world of what Jesus is supposed to be. So I think it'd be best for the country if he's not our president.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel where you're coming from. I mean, recently it was in the news. I don't know if anybody's aware, but kind of how Trump was able to gain a lot of that faith base was due to a situation and circumstances of a very big leader within the faith community and their need to handle a very touchy situation of a personal matter, right? And
You're being way too PC. This person
Go ahead.
has some sex scandals. They're a leader of evangelical movement, and bad at their reputation. And Trump's lawyer probably compromised or blackmailed them and got his support, Jerry Falwell Jr., who is also so problematic in so many ways. And this week he had his fall from grace. And I hope he does okay. Like I hope he's okay,
Well,
but it's poetic irony in some ways.
well, what I was trying to hint at was like, for me personally, the views expressed in this moment aren't that reflective of Lyrical Ones or any of his affiliates or sponsors or future sponsors. But I do come from a perspective of, having the openness and a dialogue around a person's personal life and their choices and how they choose to engage in relationships on an intimate matter. And I think that, as these individuals who were tied to Trump because of their own personal choices and endeavors felt an obligation because of them trying to maintain like this facade, right? Trying to maintain this imagery in the public, right? We don't want to be seen as we did something wrong, or we don't want to be seen as we did something foul or corrupt. And to me, the thing is, what more is human, what more is honest than owning it and living and working through it, right? To having an understanding. But I get it, right? We are often at times at the mercy of the crowd, but the crowd is people at the end of the day, and we don't earn anything by doing a disservice with truth or kind of the fallacies or the lie. And I think in this moment, I just want people to really be clear. Like, to me, I don't hold no weight in what you do on your own time and how you live and what you decide to do and how you choose to explore your relationship in an intimate level, right? What that looks like, what that is, that's for you to live and for you to have. And to know that that's kind of how you were leveraged to be in a position where now you have to support my guy, Donnie T Rumpum, Pum, right? He gained favor because you felt like you slipped up and messed up instead of being like, you know what? Some empires got to fall down. Because to me, it was almost imperial how we got to protect our equity, and we have to protect our social clout and what we've built up in the public eye, because we can't be our true self. We can't be our authentic self. We can't have space for that, right? We can't have a moment, because I mean, to me, I always look at it, especially in politics, and it's funny enough you say that. When you choose to be a public person, a public figure, you have to be ready and willing to have your privacy explored, scrutinized, and criticized. And I think no one is beyond that. And yeah, I mean, who knows? It could have been a couple pictures leak and we move on with our life in a week, right? We talk our mess, we get online and we hype it up and we make fun of. But in reality, the way the world works, come on, we would have been on to the next thing, and you could have absolved yourself from a legacy and a history where this 4 years in time has been one of the most dynamic, one of the most intense, and you are now a complicit. You're a colluded artist in this. Like you have some sense of responsibility to what is taking place. And I think that, just kind of that whole dynamic, that multi-layer enchilada of like so much sauce, so much meat, haha, and cheese and whatever else tortillas you want to throw in there. But it's the fact that this is a situation that, to me, when you own who you are and you explore honestly and openly, there's nothing to be left discovered, right? There's a responsibility you owe to the people who place faith in you, who back you to now back this other Donnie Pum, right? You owe a responsibility to those people, because now look at where we are. Like, I just want to put that out there to those that have churches or places of worship or belong to synagogues or mosque, and you decide to travel and to trying to reach people. I suggest you reach some of the poorest places in the United States and start there. But that's a conversation for a different time, a different day. But I mean, I'm kind of interested in the idea of like, when did you decide that, like, okay, I'm gonna be an active participant in the political infrastructure? Because not everybody is, right? So what to you gives you the sense of, what, I still got a stake in this, right? I got some hope, or I have some equity, some stock in it.
I think it's been the whole process. Like, to be a Christian is a political act. Like, you can't, again, there's no party alliance, but love has action. And one of the ways we act in our world is how we vote, how we purchase, how we operate in the world. And so I don't think there can be a separation. Those who want to separate it, I think it's usually for their own comfort. Like, they want to keep it private or whatever, because the status quo is working for them. Like, I remember, like, early on learning, like, oh, largely speaking, Black church has always been political. The white churches that don't want to talk politics because they don't need to. The status quo is working for them fine. And so I think the Black church has it right. Like, if we're going to talk about how to love people, we got to talk about what that looks like in this context, in this day, with this ballot and these candidates. Like, how do we do that well? And I want to go back to the, I know you've threaded the needle well, and you've actually added tons of nuance to the Falwell situation, and I really, really appreciate that. And my issue is that this person has been an advocate for values and has hurt people projecting those values, while living a completely hypocritical life personally. And that, just like, as a human, just makes me want to fight him. Not that I'm a fighter. I've learned some MMA stuff and some martial arts stuff from Greg. But that's my extent of, like, all that. But it's like, come on, man. Like, you led this institution that explicitly forbid same-sex marriage, and you expelled people who slipped up. And I appreciate your, like, sentiment of, like, let's just be honest, let's be fully open and, like, learn together as humans and, like, process this all and not hide stuff, because that's where the danger is. But he's perpetuated all that, and then backstory for the last 15 years has all this stuff going on, and that just, I pray for him. I hope he's okay. I hope he and his family are okay and all that. But at the same time, I'm not as soft, and at this moment, at least, we talk about that. Yeah.
I feel you. We can't hug for more than 10 seconds. It's a problem. I'm going to get kicked out of school. You tripping, bro.
No dancing.
Now, look, come on. No dancing. Come on. Like, I ain't saying I gotta, if I got some restraint, let me restrain myself. Like, come on, let's have a conversation. Let's really talk about it. But in this sense, it's like I said, when you put yourself in that position, you owe something to the people who supported you in getting to that position, right? You
Yeah,
owe
yeah,
something to the people who've invested or put money, stock, energy, resources, time into who you are to get to this place that we care about what you have to say, that we allow you to create these systems and these rules and create whatever little power structures that you have. Like, you owe it to the people. And the thing is that, it's not beyond me. That's why I wear a mask, because my face is not for sale. Who I am is not something that I chose to co-opt for the public, right? Like, I need my privacy. I need to retreat. I need to have my place where I can just be myself and I could take the mask off and be someone else. And I think that in this society, in this world, as I always push for privacy, I always push for anonymity. It's not to say that I'm against community. I can be for community in many capacities. But when it comes to the public, that is a different relationship that takes on a different connotation. And when you have this man who has an audience, who has people who are willing to follow his word, and then he uses that for political structure, political gain because of his own shortcomings in his personal life, that's a problem. It's not the problem what you did, it's the problem of how did you get other people involved and complicit to what you had going on. So, it's I don't want to demonize or vilify people, because that's the thing that we often like to do. But I can be angry and scrutinize your actions because it's led to this outcome, right? Like, I even looked at his speech in the original Republican National Convention, and it was like, now it has whole new meaning because of this context. Now his energy, like, he was really like, I just my phone's ringing. My phone's ringing. Hold on. And I'm like, you're in front of a whole audience and you're struggling to have any conviction, any type of like energy of like, this is what we need to do. And then your phone rings. Come on. This is where we at right now. So,
yeah,
to
yeah.
those that know, those that don't, check it out, get involved, look it up. It's real. But what I'm interested is kind of exploring the idea of like how do you kind of see the separation of church and state, right? Like a person's own identified faith versus a bigger conglomerate whole. Because I'm gonna keep it real. I come from the other end of the spectrum with the black church and political, like, how do we form these kind of practices around who we gonna vote for, when I look like, I'm gonna keep it real. I sat in the church, they told me who we should vote for, and now I look back and I'm like, oh, here we are 20 some odd years later, and this is what they've done. They've hoodwinked us. They've done some buffoonery, some, as we call it in some circles, some coonery. And to me, it was like, how do I reconcile this when the ones who were kind of giving me a place to feel sanctified, to feel love and the glory of God, are now trying to determine, what's housing going to look like? What is the economic kind of stakes for, the communities I live in and are impacted by? Because there is a tale of two worlds within the church, especially in the black community. There's what I like to call African Americans and the blacks. And with the African Americans, they often get to go to college and they get to have degrees, and they get to look down on us blacks who didn't go to college, who didn't get degrees, and don't always come through in the best dress, finest Sundays, kind of pressed in ironed gear. So I just want to see your perspective on kind of the multi layers of that.
Look, we're about to punch out because my man is a family man and we got a dip.
Oh, so we're
Yeah.
gonna have to do a
Chris,
part two.
Chris, we gonna have to get you
Anytime.
back sometime. Thanks for coming through us in this COVID
Gosh.
summer. Appreciate you
Yeah, it was so
staying up
good to
with
hang.
us.
I could keep
Oh yeah,
going. I wish I could. Like,
no,
I,
it's
I feel like we're
it's a
just
long
getting
time.
into
We got
some stuff
time.
too. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, we got time.
But
Later
I'll
though.
just say I have all the answers and I'll solve it all for you. And you'll have to have me back. And I'm just kidding. Man, those are good questions. I'd love to process and learn from,
Yeah,
like, you all. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
nah, appreciate you
Senio, it's great to meet you, and Alex, great to see you. Hope you and your
always.
people and your community, your house, and everything, your life as well, and be blessed.
Yeah,
supernatural immunity, man.
my bad, Chris. I missed the cue cards. It was some cue cards, y'all. I apologize to the audience,
You're good.
but
Look.
we now have a kind of the cliffhanger, if you will, to the sequel that we will create. There will be a sequel. So now that you have this cliffhanger, Chris Scott, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate you being open and honest and letting us explore your life and giving so much to the people. And shout out to Oak Life. Where can people find you? Where can people get involved? How can people get connected to Oak Life? What is the best ways?
Yeah, you just check out our website, oaklifechurch.com. And we do Sunday services on YouTube and have lots going on during the week. We've Instagram, all the typical stuff. When we're not in shelter in place, we meet at a theater in Oakland. But who knows when that'll be, when we can go back to
Chris,
that. But,
Chris, real quick, what causes are you and Oak Life supporting right now in the East Bay in Oakland?
yeah, tons. We just supported something. Something called Abundant Beginnings, which is we just gave to them. I think it's abundantbeginnings.org, but they do. It's basically like a preschool aged program led specifically by people of color and teaching values of inclusion, of racial equity to like the earliest formative years. And so it's beautiful. Yeah.
For sure. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you. We appreciate you. Have a good night, brother. We love you.
Yep. Take care.
Take care, brother. Peace. So as we see now, there are two of us, right? I missed the cue card. There was a message that was being given to me, and I was stuck on something else. So, it happens. It's Lyrical Ones. We're learning. It's a growing process. This is a healing community. And, I just, before we kind of wrap things up for tonight, I just want to put it out there, love yourself, love the ones you're with. It doesn't always have to look in the rudimentary sense of like being available. Sometimes that means retreating, but communicating the space, the distance, the boundaries that you need so you can heal, so you can process, so you can be. Because, when a person got to go. And we got to respect that, right? We might have pressing issues and questions, but sometimes we got to take notes. We got to hold on to those things, and we got to wait for the time and place for it to occur, right? Exactly.
That's right.
So,
and knowing what you need. Yeah, closing thoughts, man. Knowing what you need is the only way that you can communicate them. You cannot communicate your needs if you don't know what they are, and sometimes you have to then ask. Sometimes people need people around them. They need others around them to then ask what they need. When it's tough to offer that communication, when you haven't asked that question yourself, sometimes you need someone to ask it for you. And it's important. I think something that none of us needs is to consider ourselves the villain, and to think of ourselves as the hero in our own book, in our own story, and look into what it looks like to empower yourself and be stronger each day. Sometimes being stronger means doing a better job, giving 110% at being still, being slow, being restful. And sometimes it means, learning more, about, how you show up for yourself and how you show up for others. Just, keep at it. Say that. If you keep at it, you'll learn new things and you'll get better exercises for your heart muscle.
Ain't that the truth? And just to kind of wrap things up, I'm gonna do this in the most kind of presenting two sides to the coin, right? Like, blood is thicker than water, revenge is thicker than blood. Now, I say that to say this: we can't get lost in that. We gotta let go of that. We gotta move away from that. And as we move further and further into a place of healing and positive change, I just think it's something that's necessary for people to really understand and hold on to, right? Don't become lost in the sauce. Don't get lost in the I need to vilify, demonize, weaponize let me humanize, let me look at, let me realize, let me rationalize. And with that, it's just about time, it's about space, and like Alfluence said, it's about knowing what you need. And so with that, this concludes another episode of Lyrical Ones. We appreciate you, appreciate yourselves. It's been real. But peace out, y'all.
Oh, one more thing. Shout out to DC Comics for DC Fandom, the new trailers for Wonder Woman 1984 and the new Batman where he's in there beating folks down, talking about vengeance. Remember, Batman didn't do nothing out of love. So remember that as an anti-hero, hero, vigilante, whatever he is, Batman is legit for not having no superpowers, but he didn't do nothing out of love, man. Remember that. And that's all I gotta say.
Yeah, he loved his mom and his daddy. All right, we out.
But they was gone already. He wasn't loving them. He wasn't loving them that. He wasn't loving them and it's misplaced.
All right, Cross, you're gonna have to cut us off because